Welcome. This is Logan Cockrum with Action Coach Bluegrass in Southern Indiana, and you're listening to the Success Through Action podcast, where we're talking to successful business owners to hear their stories and how they took action to grow their businesses. We are here today with Julia Regan. She's the co-founder and CEO of RxLightning. Prior to starting RxLightning in 2020, she spent 2 decades in healthcare digital transformation and innovation, bringing to market and scaling products across the patient medication journey. In July of 2022, Regan was selected as an Endeavor Entrepreneur, a global distinction that recognizes and supports the world's highest growth companies. She holds an MBA in healthcare management from FIT and a bachelor's degree in psychology and neuroscience from Temple University. She lives in Greenville with her husband, Michael, and 2 children, Berkeley and Cooper. So how are you doing today?
I'm good. How are you? Thanks for having me.
I'm definitely excited to sit down and talk with you, and I appreciate you taking the time to appear on this podcast. And let's kind of start off with, how's 2023 looking for you?
2023 is exciting. I hope you, like I did, were able to disconnect over the holidays and enjoy time with family. And the holidays gave us the time to kind of reflect on where we were for 22 and project out 23. And I think that RxLightning and the team has some really exciting business momentum coming into the year. We had tremendous growth from a revenue perspective, team growth, grew a lot of our team members and brought in a lot of great executives to surround myself and my co-founder. And we're just excited about being able to help get our mission out there, our product in front of more people, and help more patients.
To our listeners that aren't familiar what RxLightning is, can you give us a brief synopsis of what you do?
We help get patients on specialty meds quicker than what today happens. So if you think of what a specialty med is, a lot of people can relate to cancer diagnoses. So they're complex meds that traditionally treat life-threatening illnesses. And today, there's a ton of different processes that providers and patients have to go through to get these patients on meds, from insurance coverage to cost barriers, because these aren't things that cost $20. These are medications that cost thousands, tens of thousands of dollars a month, which could break anybody's bank. And ultimately what happens in today's process, because they're really paper-based and fax and phone calls, is patients get delayed on therapy. So what RxLightning has done is we've created a digital experience that connects the provider and the patient and other stakeholders across the journey that work on behalf of the patient to remove paper and phone calls and faxes and create a digital experience to help get patients on therapy quicker. So if you think about real world, when you order a pizza, you know if you order it from Papa John's or Domino's where your pizza is. With these specialty meds, you get a life-threatening diagnosis and disease, and then you're dealing with the emotional burden of that. And you're also now waiting, when could I start the treatment to help save my life or extend my life or whatever that is. And patients are sitting there wondering when that's going to be. So our technology allows not only expedited time to therapy, but brings that visibility and that tracking mechanism in. So patients don't have to wonder what is happening next in the process. And they could have a little bit more comfort knowing that people are there actually working on behalf of them to get them started on therapy.
So in a world of 1,000 problems that I'm not currently aware of, I haven't personally had much experience with that. So what are the consequences for the patient? Could a lead time of 2 weeks actually impact their health condition?
It can. I think it depends on the diseases that we're talking about. Like, our platform's agnostic, so it could be everything from an extremely rare disease to just something chronic. So some of the more chronic conditions are like a horrible dermatitis or gastro issues where people can't leave their house because they can't stop itching or can't stop using the restroom, or there's fear of accidents. So those types of diseases are more emotionally debilitating from a chronic perspective. And then there's diseases where if patients don't get treatment, there's unfortunate consequences that could happen from health outcome perspective, which are what our mission's about. We don't think technology and lack of connectivity in the world that we're in should prevent somebody from being able to have good health outcomes and get access to medications and treatments. So it's pretty prevalent. I think that when you start diving into what specialty meds are and what types of disease states there are, most people could think of somebody that's close to them or like one person removed that has had a really bad experience with, unfortunately, getting access to these medications.
Since it is a problem that's obvious, why do you think you were the first to invent a more streamlined process?
I think a couple reasons to it. One is that there's so many processes along the journey that it's taken the industry time to create other technology solutions that could be leveraged to create a more efficient workflow. I think that's one. And I think the other component is there's not necessarily an easy path to the technology we built. Like when you hear the prevalence of the medications, when you realize it's the drug spend is going to hit $1 trillion in the next 5 years, and it's made up of these medications, it's easy to say, oh, there should be a solution. But when you start getting through the complexities of each step and what needs to happen with not only the technology, but also the engagement of people, it's actually a huge undertaking. For me, it's extremely personal because I have had personal experiences with specialty medications that have created the viewpoint of this is just really unacceptable and needs to be solved. So it's worth the effort on trying to dedicate a team and resources to take on the challenge.
So you first became interested in this from a personal experience?
Yeah, it's kind of twofold. Like my career definitely has been around the patient journey across medications and creating transparency and connectivity across that in different views. A lot of the parts of the process that are included in RxLightning, I've previously built with other teams and other organizations, so intimately know those processes. I think that combined with the fact of the personal experience really put me in a position to say, A, I'm capable to build the team around me and the investors around us that could solve this problem. And two, it's really important that I tackle it and somebody tackles it. Because I think a lot of organizations, it comes down to that drive and that importance to keep going when things get tough and hurdles happen.
What specific barriers to entry were there for the market?
Well, there's lots. So like if you think about it, the first thing is you've got to get adoption of people using your technology. So if something was paper-based, if you think about it, there's about 1,200 medications. There's tons of different destinations, which just aggregates up a ton of different paper forms that you need to somehow figure out how to intelligently get information off paper into a digital experience and do it in a way that's scalable because the paper changes sometimes month, every 3 months, definitely every year across all of that. So one, there's a technology barrier around stepping back and saying, how do we create a solution that could scale? Fortunately for me, I have a brilliant co-founder and architect, CTO, Brad Allen, that was able to handle the technical hurdles and challenges of what that would look like over time as we scaled. And then the second component to that is something that's paper-based, you're changing a workflow for offices. So not only do you have to get provider adoption, you've got to convince them that there's a better way and technology is the better way. Oh, and it's secure because in the healthcare world, it's all about HIPAA compliance and patient safety and making sure information isn't stolen, and with the cybersecurity attacks, et cetera, that have been happening in the healthcare industry. Entry for startups is limited, so there's a lot around that component. And then there's the other pact of I'm now taking something that was paper and I've got to make money from it. So who's going to be your payer and what's going to drive revenue for you, and figuring out the business model and really having all those aligned together, I think creates a strategic challenge for someone that might understand the problem, but not necessarily understand all the details of the healthcare industry and the dynamics that impact it.
I'm assuming to the end user, so the patient, most of what you're doing, they may not even be aware of it.
Correct. We do have some engagement with patients just because a lot of times around affordability when patients I was like, okay, so they go through the insurance is going to approve it, but the patient's told that it's going to cost them $2,000 and they don't have $2,000 laying around to pay for the medication. There's foundation assistance and there's free drug programs that are out there that could help patients afford those. A lot of times it requires patient signatures. So today with paper, it's the doctor calling and the patient having to go in. And when you add the level of COVID on it and people not going into the office as much, I think we're starting to get out of that. But when we initially launched, there was that component that we needed to solve for. So we actually have a fully HIPAA compliant digital patient tool that goes out, text, email, a couple of other ways to capture those signatures and get the consents that are needed. And then throughout that is the ability to keep that patient informed. So if you just want, as a patient and a consumer, to sign it and then hear about everything from your doctor, the process stops. But if, as a patient, you want to be kept in the loop of what's happening, did the insurance approve it? Am I going to get this free drug program? Am I not? What's the date of the shipment, etc.? We're able to create an experience where we go back out to the patient with important updates throughout that journey to keep them informed. So it depends on the patient and the drug and the experience. Sometimes it is RxLightning doing that. Sometimes it's more branded based upon the drug manufacturer or the pharmacy that is creating that experience. And maybe the patient doesn't know it's us doing it.
So it'd be hard for you to quantify the personal impact?
I think the personal impact, I think we could tell stories. So prior to RxLightning, traditionally it would take anywhere from a week to 2 weeks to get a patient on oncology meds. There's actually a bill going out, I think it's at the Senate right now, out of Florida, that is trying to mandate pharmacies getting patients' meds within 72 hours of the doctor prescribing it, just because there's so many delays. With our system, we've seen patients be shipped their medications in a couple hours after the doctor touches it. So the impact is really around time and then what that time does for that patient's emotional status. I think that there are certain outcomes and certain diseases that when we're able to get a medication in a patient's hand and the treatment's able to do its job, it's extending a patient's life, or it's just changing their comfort in everyday life with a chronic disease, that I think are a little bit unmeasurable, because it's how do you put a tangible value on someone's emotional state? But I think with everything that's happening with mental health, I think that there's a lot that resonates with people when you say, hey, we could help get a patient on meds in less than a day versus weeks or months. It's something that just resonates with most people.
I recently read a book. The author listed names of people I had never heard that probably have dramatically impacted my life. And I feel like there's a lot of organizations like RxLightning that are working in the background to make the world a little better. And we don't even know that they're doing it. It's just an interesting perspective that this organization's doing this in the background.
I can agree with that. I think there's a lot of mission-driven organizations that people just aren't aware that they're responsible for maybe doing X, Y, and Z, because that's not necessarily the intent of the companies. Like, we don't necessarily care if RxLightning becomes a household name. So what we care about is making impact and helping the providers and helping with the burnout that exists because of the paperwork and helping the patients get their drugs. Like, if we do that and achieve that at a large scale, everything else is going to fall into place. And I know I'll be able to lay my head down on the pillow at night, really proud of my team and the investors that it took a chance on what we wanted to accomplish and the impact that it had on society.
I'd like to transition here kind of away from the business and talk a little bit about Julia, if that's okay.
Sure.
I first got introduced to you because you were a keynote speaker at the 1SI annual awards. There were some things that you said that I connected with. So I think this is a good question for you. So how has failure shaped your professional success?
I try not to necessarily look at failure as failure. I know that's probably a little cliche, but like there's always some learning in it. For me, I look back and reflect on my career. There's a lot of like pivotal moments that have happened that I've grown from that hasn't necessarily been what someone would say is a huge win. I look back, starting a company is not really easy to do. Any founder that has done it, and whether they're successful or not, because I think that's in the eyes of society and might not necessarily be valid how we all look at it. But I think everybody could say, if they really wanted to admit openly, like that, it's an extremely challenging, extremely lonely place. And most people see success that goes with it, not the ups and downs or the challenges or the lows. And I think that when I've reflected over last year, just some of it, our biggest wins and our biggest strides forward as an organization actually came out of some sort of failure or some sort of roadblock or challenge. And I think that people, companies, regardless of how you're looking at it, it's how you respond to those situations that are going to stretch you and help you grow and make different strides within it. So along the way, there's a lot of things that have happened that probably have shaped who I am, but I just try to keep taking one at a time and hopefully coming out better on the other end for it.
Is there a specific obstacle you've had to overcome in the last year that you'd want to share? I
think that founders in general talk about, you go into a company and you want to win and never lose a customer, right? That's the ultimate goal you want to have. You want your product to work flawlessly for everyone. I think that as organizations grow, even really successful ones, that's just not realistic. And I think some of those moments around how our product worked or how it was scaling or how someone interpreted it or how it was meeting their objectives, how you navigate those and take the feedback, listen, and pivot or expand are some of those challenges. I think going earlier into the career, one of the challenges that I was faced with is first-time founder, female. I think that anyone wants to deny the fact that female founders or minorities are disadvantaged at raising capital are just ignorant. Even successful minorities and females that have raised capital have challenges. It's not that easy. And I think through the combination of first-time founder along with being a female founder were definitely challenging. Luckily for me, one of the things that I learned is there are investors that don't care. Finding the investors that don't care and look past the cover of what's happening and look into the deep knowledge is really important. Regardless, I would say to a male founder, that's important anyway, because money for the sake of money is great when you're first starting a business, but it could bring a lot of long-term complications. So you want the right investment partners around you, regardless of gender or ethnicity when you're raising capital. But those have definitely been some challenges. And I think about my past growing up. My dad was a doctor. My mom was a stay-at-home mom, hairdresser. I didn't necessarily have a really strong female role model just because when I was growing up, it was the 80s, 90s, there weren't female CEOs. There weren't a ton of female business owners. Even today, it's 3% of people that are raising capital are women or minorities. And yes, there are at least successful women founders and successful women CEOs in big Fortune 500 companies. It's just the skew it's definitely not even close to equal. So it's going to take generational changes, I think, to help overcome some of those challenges, which I was faced with and women and minorities are continuously faced with.
Are there any other specific challenges that you think come with navigating entrepreneurship as a woman?
There's a lot of them. There's silly things. I have several stories where within a month period, I was out to dinner on 3 different occasions, one with my leadership team, one with my board, which all happened to be extremely well-deserving males. And for me, when I hire and bring in investors, I do have a female investor, but she wasn't at dinner that night. But for me, it's about the right people. I'm not just going to hire somebody because they check a box, but hiring really the best talent, I think, is equality. Like when we get to that point, if it's a woman, a minority, a man, it should be the best person qualified for the job. But like going out, there was multiple occasions where I asked for the check and it wasn't brought to me. I'm the one who asked for it. And I was kind of not too kind to one of the servers just because it was like an unconscious bias that this woman didn't realize she was doing with me, but she was actually undermining me in front of my leadership team and my board because, I'm the founder. Like, yes, I'm a woman. So there's silly things like that we just don't even realize that impact a day-to-day component. Sometimes I think like, would somebody say this naturally to a male CEO or a male founder? Just some of the questions that I get asked. Another example, somebody actually asked me as a wife, a mother, a founder, and a CEO, how did COVID impact your business? It's like, why don't you just ask me as a founder, how did COVID impact my business? Like if I'm a mom or a dad, why is it different? My husband picks up a lot of responsibility at the house for me because of me being a founder, but it's the same question. A parent, founder, regardless of the gender, shouldn't really matter.
My wife was 6 months pregnant. No, she was about due when I heard you speak, and I didn't know what the gender was. And I'm thinking, okay, so if I had a daughter, this lady's a role model. But I ended up having a son, and it's like, well, why is she not a role model for my son? Why aren't women role models for men? It's like, we can go off on that. But I do think that there is some cultural stigma, but I think that people like you are going to help change that.
Well, I appreciate that. I hope so. 22, it was interesting reflecting over the holiday. Like I thought back around some of the very influential women who passed away this year, like Barbara Walters and the Queen of England. And, there's more. I could go through the names. And they're women that when they grew up, they were literally in a place where there were no rights for women, and they were changing barriers and completely disrupting something. I think now we're at the point where a lot of people naturally just think women have the same level of equality as men, but then there's a lot of things happening in this climate, and I think that it's going to take more than just the female population to make change or the minority population to make change. It's going to be a collective we, acknowledging, like you said, anybody could be a role model to anybody based upon like different values and things that we're doing. And I think if we all kind of do our part, society will be better for it. And if for whatever reason I help make an impact locally, that's great. I know for me, I have 2 children. I want to make sure my daughter and my son, but my daughter specifically understands like she can do whatever she wants. And my son to understand like his life in the future, she could do whatever she wants. And he should support her for that, because that's what success looks like for me, for my family.
I think another topic I want to talk about is mentorship. There is a myth out there that people are self-made and that they, get to a position of where you're at and they've done it exclusively by themselves. But have you had mentorship?
Oh yeah. I think mentorship, books, like constant learning is great. Like I look at my bookshelf and it's to the left, well, my right, your left. But I think I've read 20 or 30 books this year. All were professional books. Have no clue how I actually had the time to do that. I realized that I have the time when my son or daughter are watching something that I really don't want to watch. So I read a book and I sit with them and cuddle on the couch. But the books have been tremendous. I think when I think about people, there's so many mentors along the way that I have that helped impact my career, helped guide me through decisions, challenge me on decisions and my thinking. And I'm really grateful to them and luckily have really strong relationships still with those today. But even when I look further to it, like with some of the success that we've had locally, people reach out, and I always take an opportunity to have a conversation with someone because you just don't know what you're going to learn. Like most of the time, people now are coming to me thinking like, I have all the answers. First of all, I don't. I barely have any answers. I like to think I could have the tools to figure the answer out and navigate it, but having them just naturally isn't something that I think I have. So I'll be talking to somebody and we'll be talking about fundraising or my experiences. There's always something that I learned from those conversations and give me a different perspective. So I think mentorship comes in a lot of different views and forms and shapes. And I try to take advantage kind of all of them and be constantly learning and challenged. And one of the things that you really have to do, at least for me, going through that is being really open and reflective to say, oh, maybe I am too strict in this form of thinking, or maybe this I could do better, and be just open to growth in order for the books and the people and any conversation that you have in business to help move you forward and keep you growing and learning.
The thing that we talked about prior to recording this was that you've put people around you that are great at things that you're weak at. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah. I joke with people that my success as like founder CEO is when I'm not needed in the room. The day that something could happen to me and I step away from the business and the team that I built and I had the privilege to work with is able to function with minimal guidance or without me makes me successful. So I always try to look at that and try to figure out how is the collective we accomplishing the goal. Like I'm the face of the company because that's my role. And people like to credit everything or a lot to me. And that's just the furthest thing from the truth. You know, I think if you look at a lot of really successful companies, it's the company and the people that make it. It's not just one singular person or a handful of people. It's everyone.
You mentioned that you read a lot of books. What has been your favorite book of 2022?
Oh, there's lots of them. I think my favorite book was Crucial Communication. I realized that the book was written for me. I carry it with me. There's a secondary follow-up book, Crucial Accountability, which is really great. But I realized that communication is really an art form. The high level this book says, we go into a conversation, whether it's a personal conversation or a work conversation. The nice thing about the book, it could help like through tough personal relationships to challenging employer or team conversations. And whenever we have an interaction, we both make up this story. You're going to make up a story of what happened, and I'm going to make up a story of what happened. And it's in that split second that our minds make up these stories that we determine all of these things around intent and motivation and why we had these conversations, which create conflict traditionally. And it's just this book that kind of breaks down the communication process to understand the unconscious things that occur naturally, and then gives you the tools and guidance around how to navigate really tough conversations. And one of those learnings in those tough conversations, like I'm a really passionate person, so I could be a little bit of a hothead. I also could ignore people and avoid a conversation from avoiding conflict. Personally, those are kind of my two go-tos, I guess, naturally. And when I realized in the book, what are some of your natural tendencies going to accomplish? It's ultimately nothing. It's going to actually deter what the ultimate goal is. So like getting the tools to break down the why and then how to navigate them and keeping focused on like the ultimate objective of what a conversation would be to the endpoint is this entire book. And it's something that literally I'll pull open and be like, okay, there's this situation. I need to go back and refer to a couple pages to help me understand myself, one. And then two is how to have maybe a conversation around the topic to elicit an outcome that would happen in a very healthy, potential way. So it's a great book. It's like my new Bible.
Do you have any specific reading goals in 2023?
I don't. I actually don't like to read, which is shocking. I have that many books and I don't like to read. I don't read Kindles. Like, I don't do audiobooks. Like, this one's that I got over the holiday, the 10X rule. I've not read it yet. It's still sitting on my desk. So people will recommend a book, or there's something that I'm like, I'm having this challenge. I need to go find a book to handle it or figure it out, and I'll grab it. So I don't know if I read one book, if I read 20 books. We'll see. I'm sure it'll probably end up being more because I fly enough that I'll grab a book in the airport or something. Do you have any reading books that you would recommend?
Oh, wow. That's a hard question.
I know. Right?
I read way too much. Actually, I don't do New Year's resolutions, but my biggest goal this year is to act more. And reading is great. I just read too much. I just don't act enough. So one book that I recently read that I think is really great, and I think people like you, like successful people, intuitively get this, but it's called Start With Why. I don't know if you've read that book.
I'm not. I'm going to write it down.
I think it's transformative. Probably the best book that I read in 2022 if we're talking business-related books.
This is usually how my reading happens. Like, somebody says, hey, this is really good, so I'm going to go grab it. I'll get back to you on what I think. Maybe next year, yes, that would be my go-to.
Okay. Hopefully. It's a great book. So, Julia, I actually have one last question for you. If you could have dinner with any 3 people, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
Ooh, well, mine are probably personal, so I would definitely want to have dinner with my grandfather because I never met him. Would want to go have dinner again with my gram because she passed away last year. She was a remarkable woman. Taught me a lot. And I'll just stop with those 2. But
okay.
Personal, I think that there's probably so many people from a business perspective I could want to go have dinner with. But for me, like, everything's about people and relationships. And those are 2 one that I didn't get to have because he passed by before I was alive. And everything I've heard about from him would be, I should go meet him. And then my grandma, just because she was like a second mom and always there. And, that would just be one that I'd want to go see her and catch her up on.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it was a pleasure having you on, and I hope you all have success in 2023, and thanks for taking the time.
Yes, thanks for having me. I really appreciated getting to know you and having the conversation.
To everyone who tuned into this episode, thanks for listening to the Success Through Action podcast. Make sure to take action, and I'll see you next time.